The internet, and by extension, game dev YouTube, champion the mythology of the solo game developer, the idea that a singular person can make a successful game entirely on their own. I say mythology because this is largely a myth. Games aren't created in a vacuum, and even if you do all the development work on your own, there's usually assistance you receive somewhere along the way, whether it's from the assets that you buy, feedback you receive from playtesters, financial support from a spouse or backers, and even advice from a friend. For example, hand cannon has been solely developed by me, from the sprites to the code. However, I did hire someone to do my retro alternative style cover art. I hired someone else to create the logo, and my friend Cartoon Coffee did the main cover art alongside the cutscene art, and my stepdad even did the original concept art, back when the game was just a twinkle in my eye. Then I have those who are assisting with the translation, my playtesters, and most of all, feedback that I've received from people who viewed screenshots and gameplay footage. Despite writing all of my own code, making all of my own sprites, and creating the story, I can still list at least 10 people who helped me somewhere along the way. And that's before I even include encouragement from family. In spite of all of this help, I would argue that Hand Cannon was a solo developed game. But I could imagine that there's at least one person out there who would argue against that claim. And honestly, I think that argument could have some merit. So, why does game development have this obsession with the solo game developer, when almost every other art form openly relies on collaboration? Music usually at least has engineers, if you're playing all of your own instruments, and bands used to be the norm. Movies are made with entire teams, and even a large portion of the greatest paintings ever made were created by multiple people. See the Sistine Chapel for reference. To figure this out, I think we need to go back to the 70s and see why we have such an obsession about making a game entirely on your own. Back when games, a lot of the time, were made by a singular person. Despite not having access to a higher level language, most games were made in the span of a few weeks, or months, during this era, not years. Graphics were abstract to say the least, and music and sound design in most games were almost non-existent, as you were limited to a couple of boops and beeps. However, even in the simplicity of the games of yesteryear, most of the major hits were not actually developed by one person. You do have the standouts, like Warren Robinette creating and designing adventure on his own for the Atari 2600, and Tomohiro Noshikado creating Space Invaders. But then you have games like Pac-Man that were made with 9 people. Think about that. Pac-Man. 9 different developers all coming together to create Pac-Man. However, even when games were made by multiple people, credit usually went to the lead designer, like Iwatani in the case of Pac-Man, and Miyamoto getting credit for Donkey Kong, in spite of only working on the design and the art. The actual programming was outsourced to a different company, Ikigami Tashinki, who would eventually go on to sue Nintendo for unauthorized use of their code in Donkey Kong Jr. But that's a story for another video. Then we have Richard Garriott, the creator of the Ultima series, also known as Lord British. He was assisted by his friend Ken Arnold, but no one thinks of Ken when they think of Ultima. Everyone thinks of Richard. Ken pioneered the use of tile-based graphics in the RPG genre, but something so pivotal to the early JRPG and CRPG genres are nothing more than a minor footnote to most people. Even as we enter into the 90s and games become more complex, we still continue to look towards one person for a game's success and failure. Ed Boon is the face of Mortal Kombat. Carmack is credited with Doom, while I would argue his role was extremely important in the design of the engine of the game. Without his artists and designers, it would have been a rather dull tech demo. This was proven in the decrease in quality. Just look at Doom 3 and Rage against Id's earlier catalog. Hideo Kojima is credited with Metal Gear, but no one remembers the names of the programmers or level designers. Cliffy B with Unreal and Gears, Todd Howard with Elder Scrolls, and I think you're starting to get my point. The public treats these individuals like they're the sole machine producing these games, despite having irrefutable proof otherwise. Just look at Inafune in Mighty No. 9. This man was seen as the brains behind Mega Man, but without his team behind him, he wasn't able to achieve success. The lead programmers, graphic designers, graphic programmers, and level designers are all just as important as the masterminds that we praise. These games aren't made in a vacuum. They are made by teams, and I'm sure even the few that were made alone, such as Adventure and Space Invaders, Both developers likely consulted with their coworkers for ideas and inspiration. Anyone who's ever worked in a job that requires any sort of creative thinking knows this firsthand. It's why water cooler talk exists. This leads us to indie games. This generation of indie developers, and technically all gamers, have grown up with the misconception that their favorite games have been carried by one person. We've all seen the credits of our favorite games and seen the teams involved, but our brains still go to those key figures. Just like George Lucas with Star Wars, we forget the team behind the face, and then we think to ourselves that we can be just like them and achieve the same thing. On the indie side, this was just further propagated by Indie Game the Movie, with the focus on Jonathan Blow and Phil Fish, both obviously getting assistance on their games, but the documentary focusing on the single devs just further propagated the myth, as if the work done by others is inconsequential in comparison to their efforts. I believe all art is a collaborative effort, whether or not you're working directly with others, because we're all working off of inspiration, which we had to receive from somewhere. Inafune very much had an indirect hand in hand cannon, whether he likes it or not. But even if you could make a game completely on your own, without the vaguest hint of assistance from another, I promise you the experience wouldn't be so great. I know firsthand what it's like to silo myself from others during the development process, because you have an idea that you want to get out, and it doesn't feel like anyone in the outside world can or wants to help you. This is how I ended up with my first demo of hand cannon, which honestly wasn't very good, and forced me to go back to the drawing board, with the advice from the people who played it during a gaming convention. If I hadn't been trying to work in a vacuum and make something without at least some of my friends' input, I likely wouldn't have wasted months of my life. And that's before you even consider the amount of fun that you have just working with others and bouncing ideas off each other. So to those who are there wanting to make a game, find your team. You can handle all of the code, art, music, and story on your own if you really want to, but find people who will playtest for you. Find a friend you can bounce ideas off of, and have someone in your life to provide you with some sort of encouragement and inspiration. And if you really want to make games with others, join a team. I highly recommend game jams. It's a way to get your feet wet in the world of working with teams, as well as trying something new. Plus, you never know. You may find a friend that you can work with on future projects. There does come a time when a team can grow too large, and you can have a breakdown in communication, but honestly, that isn't happening to any indie who's just starting out, as you'll never have a team of more than a handful of people who are willing to work for free or revenue share. So don't worry about it. The solo developer is real, but honestly, it's not something you should strive to be. Making a game, just like playing a game, is almost always better with a couple of friends, even if they're just there to watch. Don't be like me, learn from my mistakes, and rely on your friends and family. My favorite moments of creating music and games have always come from creating with others, and I'm sure you'll find the same thing. Anyways, that's it for today. Thanks for watching, and thanks for your time.